Well, thank you everyone for joining another episode of the Brown Girl Green Show. I'm Christy Drutman, and I interview environmental leaders and advocates about the importance of diversity and inclusion as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. I am very excited to continue our series about deep seabed mining, especially why it will all leave us into deep doo-doo. So I'm excited to follow up on our previous episodes that were talking about this topic. Previously, we covered science, we covered indigenous rights, and now we're going to be covering an angle from the business and the banking side of things. I really wanted to do this episode because I feel like at the end of the day, when it comes to an issue like deep seabed mining, we have to talk about the dollars. We have to talk about who's funding these projects to even be there in the first place. And so I wanted to have an expert who specifically comes from that industry and that space, who has had to grapple with knowing that deep seabed mining is on the rise and is in discussions. And they are a bank and an entity that has chosen to actually go against it and to take a stance for a moratorium against deep seabed mining. So I'm very excited to have our guest today and would love for you to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Christy. Yes, my name is Johanna Schmidt. I am a researcher at Triodos Bank. Triodos is a bank in the Netherlands which provides, business loans, but also has retail banking clients, has an investment management side, so investing in stock listed and private debt and equity. So a full-blown financial institution, not the biggest one, but with a very clear mission. Namely, to drive positive impact, to invest in impact and take really the sustainability side of things into consideration.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So could you tell us a little bit more about the role of banks in financing deep seabed mining?
Sure. I think that's a very interesting question because over the last couple of years, I have not heard much in the financial sector about this topic. Traditional banks, they may go in any way, in any direction, but Triodos is really, really about financing impact and also not doing harm and financing harmful activities. So thinking about the environmental consequences, for instance. So at Triodos, it's really important to know that we have had a very strict mission for the past 40 years and also a document called the minimum standards, which are the absolute minimum requirements that we set for on our investments. So if companies are involved in controversial activities, we don't finance them, we don't invest in them. And so this document, this set of criteria has been around for 25 years, but then we also decided to include deep sea mining in it 2 years ago in 21.
And why was that? Why did you all decide that was a risky investment?
Yeah, a risky investment. Well, a catastrophic investment, I would rather say.
Catastrophic investment, yeah.
No, it's, like the problem with deep sea mining is that, there's not enough known about the environmental impacts of it, right? So if you, engage in deep sea mining and do not know what could be the irreversible long-term consequences of that, and if you're out for the short profit to, mine minerals, metals, and then just take it out, then it's a very short time profit calculation. And this is not what we're up for. And what is really important there, I think, and that's also what we base our assessment on and or our decision not to invest or finance deep sea mining. I'm sure you know the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they have a very clear stance. They're saying it should not be done until we are very clear about the consequences of it so that we have a scientific evidence. That's the first thing. And then it should only always done if there's a clear environmental impact assessment of the consequences. And there we don't really know. And then also there needs to be a good governance and good mitigation strategies. So there's a whole of requirements that this organization, which is really key in the whole discussion, is there. And, as a prudent and precautionary investor, we just don't want to get involved until there's basically very clear green light. I mean, at this point, it's just too risky for us because we don't want to create lasting harm in the biosphere and the ecosystem at the deep sea bed.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all of that. It's interesting because I'm seeing the opposite end of things, people who are supporting deep seabed mining, promoting what they're calling this new sustainable gold rush for minerals. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. A sustainable
Oh,
gold rush.
a sustainable gold rush. Wow, I've never heard that expression. It makes me, I don't know, it makes me feel very, very uneasy, to be very
Me too.
honest. Because, I mean, what is in there is, of course, the gold rush. Easily explained, because probably, if things fall right, you could make a lot of money with deep sea
Yeah.
mining. Because, and the background to that is just that there's a lot of demand for these metals. When we think about batteries, smartphones, solar panels, yada yada yada, you need these metals and minerals. So there's a huge demand, and if you can satisfy it, if you can serve that demand, great. Now, why? So that's the gold rush, okay? And if you then if it's claimed to be sustainable, then it's just basically a displacement of another problem. Why is other mining not sustainable? And there we get into other problems, which are the social consequences. So if you think about mining in the Republic of Congo or something, where we have problems with child labor, forced labor, bonded labor, these are human rights and labor rights violations, which are really, really severe. But then to think you can solve that problem by just shifting the focus and causing environmental consequences, it's not sustainable. It's a displacement of the problem, and this is terrible, to say the least. And I also think it's not as black and white. So, it's not oh, we have this huge demand, we need to find it somewhere. But also there's a lot of recycling going on, So we need to also, as consumers, as business, understand what other alternatives we have. First of all, do we always need a new smartphone? How can we make the design different to actually use batteries again, or create make the lifetime longer, or to recycle certain metals? That's the question we should be asking, because there we have no, or much lower environmental impact than compared to deep sea mining. So it's more about the design of products than the business focus, and also as consumers, what we're purchasing.
Totally. And I'm glad you brought that up because, there's a lot of big name companies now that are signing on to a moratorium. So it's not like it's this very fringe thing to now take a stance against this practice. And even this past year, Lockheed Martin and some other big financiers are actually dropping their investments in this practice. So we're seeing that even pretty big name financiers are not buying into the propaganda that this is something we need to jump into, especially when the science hasn't been clear. But I just wanted to bring that up because I think there are a lot of entities that are very much chasing after a pretty penny for something that has not been explored, has not been fully, developed out, but yet they're okay, we're gonna do it because we can make a lot of money out of it. It's prospecting, right? And maybe you'll get money in the short term, but again, when we were looking at the long term prospective risk of that, when the science hasn't been proven, it's just not worth it.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
It's don't touch it, be a bit precautionary, be prudent, don't touch it until we know for sure that there's, that it's, it doesn't have irreversible and long-term consequences. Absolutely.
Yeah. And talking about recycling, we didn't really get to dive into that too much in previous episodes, but from what you're seeing as the alternatives with recycling, could you talk a little bit more about that for people who might not know? I know you just talked about it, but if you could break that down a little bit more on what are the alternatives that have been proposed for deep seabed mining?
Yeah, it depends on which minerals you're looking for. Is it is it copper? Is it nickel, aluminium? What exactly? And then it depends on which products you have, and so on. But in terms of the positive sides, or what companies that we invested in are doing is for instance Toyota, that you may know, in Japan, in that space, they are recycling more than 99% of the batteries. So if they're recycling them, that creates that also addresses the demand. So that's great. Or we have another a company that we are really proud of to be invested in called the Freyr. I think it's a Norwegian company. I'm not so sure about the jurisdiction now, but they make so-called semi-solid batteries that have a higher energy density. So, they have, with less minerals, you can create or store more energy. So these are the alternatives. And this is, I think, what as an impact investor we should be looking at instead of, deep sea mining.
Yeah, because
Sustainable gold rush, that was terrible.
I know, it's terrible. That was literally the tagline at the recent deep seabed mining conference that just happened last month in the UK.
No way.
Yeah, it literally says on the website, gold rush, join the gold rush. It's whack, it's crazy. I know.
Oh man, where was that? I should show up there and
I know, you gotta show up there. It's wild. And so I'm just wondering also, like, yeah, because this practice is so new, like, I mean, even with investment, you all have your own minimums. Do other banks have things like that where, like, they have that ethos? Like, I mean, I know that's, like, an even bigger question on, like, how do we get banks to have an ethos around their investments? But I'm just wondering, like, how did that happen with Triodos? Like, how, like, it seems like it's embedded in the DNA of the bank. Has it always been like that? Just wanting to know a little bit more on how do we get more banks to have minimums and think about their investments?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Triodos is a very special bank because it was founded 40 years ago, 43 years ago, maybe even, on the principle of, like, financing change and also changing finance. So, like, we want to invest in finance in the good things, but also change the practices of the financial industry. And that is, of course, by just by leading by example, so doing what we're doing and inspiring others, but also really speaking up. So we are really busy in, speaking up in the debate, advocacy, lobbying, also, talking to other banks and in the financial sector, but also engaging with civil society. For instance, also on the topic of deep sea mining, we, like a couple of months ago, talked with the Environmental Justice Foundation, and, and that's also a very, very important network, to just change the status quo. And I know of one or two other financial players that have a position on deep sea mining, which is also a no-go, but that's very little if you look at the landscape. And this is also very European based, the knowledge that I have on the financial sector.
Yeah, totally. It seems like it's slowly growing, but it still isn't mainstream yet. And there needs to be a lot more institutions that are held accountable to care about this. And yeah, so when you hear from people let me say that again. So when it comes to this making business sense, I know that you were saying about it being a catastrophic investment. What would you say to businesses that are trying to view this as a chance to hop on something super profitable short term? What are your thoughts? What's your message to them that might be listening and they're just well, we can make a lot of money. What's your problem?
Well, make lots of money in the short term and create the world for the future generations to come. Oh, nice, if that's your plan, if you want to be involved in that, I think that's a very tricky conversation to have. No, but jokes aside, I think you really picking up on the tagline again, sustainable gold rush, you really need to understand what's going on there. I mean, we've had all the discussions around Bitcoin, where people thought they could make enormous short-term profits and just jump on that and just but if you don't understand the underlying mechanisms also of investments, it's too risky. And then you can make an informed assessment. So, for instance, also deep sea mining. As of now, there's the High Sea Treaty that it hasn't been really signed yet, but it's there, that is trying to regulate deep sea mining. So if there are some, if I may say, gold diggers, deep sea gold diggers, trying to make the short profits there, and invest all of their money, let's in theory put all the money on a company saying, okay, we're gonna do deep sea mining and make a lot of money. Then in a few years, there's a regulation coming out. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature establishes that deep sea mining is too dangerous. It has too bad consequences. We don't allow it. It's a no-go. So there's a regulation against it. So what do you do with your investments? Boom, they're zero or negative, So like all the money you put in there, you may never get back, So I think this is what you really need to be very careful about. And this is just regulation. This is not even caring about like the environment or future generations or whatever. This is just financial, risk.
Well, clearly anyone who's a deep sea gold digger is not going to care about the environment. But yeah, if you care about your money, period, and your capital investment, like you should be caring that, like, because of how precarious this is and how new it is, why would you risk that? So I love that you brought that up. I also love what you said earlier about displacing the blame or saying all of a sudden this is going to be the most environmentally and socially friendly version of mining. That's how it's been pitched, right? Like it's been like, oh, well, there's been all these human rights violations with land-based mining. So this is going to use these like remote controlled robots that aren't going to use humans. And it's going to be so good for the environment. It's going to be so responsible and we have to do it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, show me your sources. Who says that it's environmentally friendly? Who says that there are no consequences? And like the authoritative source for me is once again the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. If they say, yeah, it's no problem, I may be fine with that, but like that's not like the outcome I'm expecting, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel like that's really valid. Like, I mean, like, yeah, in social media we always say like people will just make up sources and will be an authority on something and just be like, I heard from a guy who heard from a guy that like this is fine. And yeah, like I've been seeing all these websites, like this company called Impossible Metals. They have a whole website and it literally says that mining for critical minerals is an essential part of the transition to a green economy, which in some ways, yes, there is some validity in that like we have to get these minerals from somewhere, but to do deep sea bed mining to get it is not the only way, as we've discussed in this episode. And they say
hang on.
Oh yeah,
Like,
go
I mean,
on.
they're saying like the mining for the metals is like key for the energy transition. Like the metals may be key, but the mining, that's the step behind it. So they already like, like twist like the narrative in a different way. And I wonder, Impossible Metals, I wonder who's behind them. Is it a company? Is it some lobby organization? Always check your sources. That's the first step in research, and especially on such a topic, it's so important.
Yeah, like it literally says we're building robotic vehicles to get critical battery metals while protecting the seafloor ecosystem. How are you going to do that
Right.
if you've never done it? If you've never done it, it's not being regulated. Like, how are you going to ensure that?
Yeah. And then also like, look, I mean, okay, this is like, somebody with an investment perspective speaking. Of course, I work for a bank. I've been in this business for like 10 years or something. But like, look at the market, like, which are the players? What are the licenses? For instance, in order to just be allowed to conduct deep sea mining, you need a license, the license to operate to do that. Who's handing out this license? Like, and these license per se is an asset for the investments. So if you don't have them, like, what do we need the robot for? Great, you have a machine and you can use it. You can store it in your garage. Great. There goes your investment. But also, and this is, I think, like that's my personal reference to Bitcoins, or like cyber currencies. If there's a hype around it and then people don't check the sources and they just like love to jump on it, thinking they make a lot of money, it's always very, very tricky. It's very risky. So yeah, once again, the precautionary principle. Sure. For me, in the investment business, that's always the first thing I think about.
So this was so helpful and informative. And yeah, just appreciate you sharing all the information you did on the episode today. I just wanted to know, what are some resources that listeners could learn more about why deep sea bed mining does not make business sense? I know IUCN is a really great resource and we're going to put that in the show notes, but are there other institutions or entities that people could learn more to understand why this is an issue from a business lens?
Yeah, of course. I think the Environmental Justice Foundation, they came out with a report just a month ago, and I really liked their report. It was very informative, yeah, and very, very clear also. And they also picked up on the financial perspective. So I think that's really good. And then for the nerds among your listeners, maybe like monitoring the United Nations treaties and discussions on the Treaty on the High Seas, that may be also very, very interesting because, that's what will be coming with the regulation more and more, I guess.
Yeah, and I know in July or June, sometime this summer, the International Seabed Authority is going to be making decisions around actually starting to permit this and putting out licenses. And so there's a really big urgency once this episode comes out that listeners should definitely keep up to date. I've obviously mentioned a lot of organizations and frontline organizations on the ground that are fighting against this, a lot of organizations that have petitions circulating. So definitely check out the other episodes, and we'll also put those links in the show notes for folks as well. But it's so important that people debunk the greenwashing of deep seabed mining, especially these ideas that this practice can be sustainable, that it doesn't address human rights violations. This is one of the biggest human rights violations of the planet if this gets approved to the extent it is. It is a huge potential carbon bomb where basically we're destroying some of the biggest depths of the ocean that have yet to be explored. It is going to be disastrous for the planet, disastrous for the environment. And if we care about human rights, we're going to destroy the largest carbon sink in the world. That is going to destroy humanity. So I just think it's very wild to me, this weird disconnect and cultural, I don't even know, dissociation between this idea of like, oh, we can make this sustainable even though we haven't even explored it, while also we care about the planet, and so we want to be like this responsible mining in general. Like, it just always blows my mind. So I just think consumers need to really sniff that out, call out deep seabed mining, and understand that like it doesn't make sense for businesses or any investors to be engaged in this practice.
Yeah, and I think, like the human brain likes to have things simple. So if somebody's telling you, hey, you can make a lot of money on that and it's very sustainable. And if you say yes to that right away without checking the sources and thinking about actually what this actually implies, I think humanity has another problem.
That's what I'm saying. So do you have any last calls to action for listeners on today's show?
I think everybody should like really make sure that they stay informed on the debate to see what's going on, and really, because that's also what I understood is really important for your listeners, don't fall for like such like window dressing and greenwashing of what is it again, the sustainable gold rush. Bullshit, honestly. It's so think twice, check the sources, and follow the debate and think long term.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate your time and for joining today's episode and sharing your wisdom on why this is not a good investment for people or the planet. Thank you so much.